Hello, everybody, and welcome to our special forum. This is sort of a singular forum in which I am introducing different kinds of justice issues. The reason being, the council and I had talked about how we were going to end this year with our theme, Let Peace Rule Your Hearts. And as with all the things we've explored, mental health, spiritual health, relational health, communal health, just sort of getting broader and broader in our understanding of peace. And with all of our peacemakers that we interviewed, we get the understanding that peace is more than just the feeling we have inside, although that can be cultivated. But in many ways, peace is something that we also seek in the world. And so as I was looking at this, peace or shalom is that wonderful Hebrew word, and it's such an extensive word. Shalom in Hebrew means that the whole world is living in harmony with one another. There's wholeness, there's healing, there's salve, that's the healing salve, salvation. All things are thriving and doing well. So in that case, how do you get there? And the Bible is very clear. The prophets and Jesus repeatedly talk about the themes of justice as being in the heart of God. That shalom and justice and mercy, all of that is intertwined. In Micah 6:8, we hear, "What does the Lord require of you but to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God?" In Luke, which we've been studying this year, very beginning of Luke, Jesus has this beautiful passage. Luke 17, he unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he's anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of the sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free and proclaim the year of the Lord's favor," which is the year of Jubilee, when things are restored and order and justice are restored. So even though Jesus didn't specifically say, "I came to do justice," in a lot of ways, that's exactly what he was saying. Furthermore, in Luke 10, we get that passage where the lawyer says, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. Do this and you will live." So for that reason, we're closing this year talking about the different kinds of justice. Because if we want to love our neighbor, if we want to help to create shalom on this world, we honestly have to pay attention to people whose lives are not quite like ours, people whose lives are really struggling for reasons that could actually be fixed. One more piece before we dive into it. Last summer, when I was attending some of the marches that were happening against police brutality, there was a phrase that people would say that was, "No justice, no peace." Very applicable, right? Because their understanding was that if you don't have justice in society, you're never going to have peace, or that peace is a false peace, which we hear about in the Bible too. How do you know the things that make for peace, as Jesus says? But I love the play off of that, which is, if you know justice, you know peace. Meaning, if you know and can realize and make real justice in the world, guess what? Peace will follow. And then there's a beautiful quote by Cornel West that says, "Justice is what love looks like in public." So for all of these reasons, we're going to talk about different kinds of justice, because we want to love our neighbor as ourselves. And justice is more than just changing personal behaviors, but rather there are systems in place that have laws and have processes that create oppression and difficulty for people, which leads to injustice. So the first one that I want to talk about is it's a kind of body justice. It's disability justice. It's fat justice, which is a word that's new for me. But basically, it's talking about the fact that because if people's bodies diverge from the norm, which is a white, able-bodied, heterosexual male, the further you diverge from that center, the less you're protected and the more difficult it is for you to navigate the world and get what you need. So disability justice, for example, are people who have disabilities. It could be more than just physical, but a lot of times we know about physical with ADA requirements. In our church, we make sure that if you cannot walk up and down steps, except for the chancel, out of luck there, which is a problem, but that you can park, you can access our building with a button, you can go to all of the floors, and you can use a bathroom with wheelchair or other aids. And not every building is accessible. So if you have a physical disability, you may go to places where parking is difficult, where entering a building is difficult, or navigating around is difficult, where they don't have concessions for you. So even though there are laws out there, they're not always enforced or understood. And the thing about power is the people who tend to be in power don't often think to ask the people who are struggling about their solutions. They don't often listen to the people who are affected. And we hear this over and over again. And just think about a council, a church council saying, oh gosh, how do we get more young people involved? And so they sit around and they scratch their heads and they come up with all sorts of programs and ideas that they tell the youth director to do. They never actually ask young people, what do you need? What do you want? They may never bring a young person onto the council to help advise and create a different culture. Do you see what I mean? But body justice is expanded as well to fat people. And I use that term because it has been claimed by the fat community of saying, you know, we need to claim this word because it's often been used against us. But we also don't want to, diddle-daddle around the truth of it. This is what it is, and we need to talk about justice. Because just like people who have disabilities who can be denied access into buildings, they can also be denied proper health care and proper access to services that they need. The same is true for fat people, that the further away you get from that center, which includes a thin, able-bodied white man, the further away you get from that, the harder life is, and the more there's discrimination. And so there's stories of it is not illegal to deny someone of a certain weight a hotel room, a seat on an airplane without an incredible amount of work, like having to buy 2 plane tickets, and then after you're done with the flight, you need to call customer service of the airline to get reimbursed for that second seat you had to buy. Oh, but maybe a different airline has a different policy, blah, 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 blah. To even just being told at the last minute, no, you can't be on this flight. We just decided right now you can't be on this flight. Even access to health care. There are a significant amount of doctors who refuse to see patients over a certain weight. So the people who may really care about their health and want to get help are actually denied being seen and often treated. Lots of stories of fat people who have gone to see doctors and been treated inhumanely, cruelly, not even looked at, not people who'll just say, come back when you lose weight and walk out the door, and that's it. So there's a lot of problems that we have when we're talking about body justice. We're saying every person has the right to have autonomy over their own body and access to the help that they need, access to the things that they need, whether it's a physical location or help. And they also should not be denied dignity or humanity or jobs or what they need in order to live. So that's what we're talking about, and there's a lot that can fall under body justice, including health care for women, for Black, Indigenous people of color, often they are not studied or listened to in their issues and in their problems as much as the norm, right? As I mentioned before. Okay, a lot more that could be said. Great books that are written about that. But we're going to move on to economic justice, because economic justice is something that is discussed quite a bit in our culture right now. It is the idea that to live in our economy, people have the right to survive and the right to even thrive. So there's talk about a living wage. There's talk about passing laws that make it harder to do predatory lending. There are laws, banking laws and healthcare laws and other things that seem to punish you when you're poor. Legal ways in which to literally make it harder for poor people to go about and get what they need. And all of this leads to massive stress, which leads to mental health issues and physical health issues. But if you can't afford to see a doctor and the doctor doesn't listen to you or talk to you anyway, it's this very cyclical thing. So for people to have economic justice, to be able to make what they need and to be able to live where they want to live and how they want to live, and there's so many good laws and good ideas of how that could be done. The next one is criminal justice, which involves more than just policing, but actually the courts, sentencing, parole. That whole system really needs reform. And I got to sit in on some really good forums and discussion groups about the necessary needs for criminal justice. And we know that there needs to be change because we hear the anecdotes and the studies, the statistics from people who've experienced the injustice, from researchers who've studied it. We also know from people who've passed laws that some of the laws that have been passed for criminal justice have been meant to target minorities. It hasn't even been that hidden except from the public, but anyway. So multiple pieces, beginning with policing, as we've heard about with police brutality and other things. We do have the statistics that prove that people of color are stopped more often for minor infractions, sometimes not for infractions at all. They're interrogated more often, they're arrested more often, and often abused by the police more often than, say, white people. That is true with people of disabilities. Again, it's so important to realize the norm in our culture is the white, able-bodied, I should add thin, middle-class male. And anytime you diverge from that, every part of our system in our society is set up to disproportionately treat you differently. So policing is one thing that a lot of people are talking about. I'm not going to go into all the solutions. There are really, really good solutions for how to change what's happening with our policing right now. But there are laws such as the stop and frisk and the war on drugs that have disproportionately affected Black people, that have enabled police to stop and frisk and go after seemingly innocuous behavior from Black people. And then many of them are arrested. And here's where we get to the next piece of the pie. If you are arrested and you are held in jail and maybe cannot afford bail overnight, now you have family issues because you may be needed at home. Now you may potentially lose your job. A lot of lower income jobs do not just let you miss work, not show up for work, especially not because you're in jail for crossing the street at the wrong time or whatever it is. So it disrupts your family, it disrupts your job, and then if you are then brought to court for your charge, this gets to another level. 82% of people who are arrested qualify for a public defender, but a public defender may have 250 clients at a given time and sometimes just 5 minutes to look over a case before they go to trial. They don't know their client. They haven't been able to formulate a real defense. And so in that moment, that person's at a massive disadvantage. They are most likely convicted. We know that black males are convicted at a much, much higher percentage for the exact same crime than are white males, and that they get a higher sentence than white males who would be convicted. So that leads us to 1 in 4 black men who are incarcerated will be incarcerated in their life. Not because black people are more dangerous, not because they do more dangerous crime. In fact, a vast majority are low-level and nonviolent crimes where they get, caught and sentenced at a much higher rate than white men or women doing the same thing. So another piece for us to consider is that when crime is committed, genuine crime is committed, it's usually, out of research, they found it's because there's a lack of money, a lack of education and mobility, a lack of mental health, and substance abuse. And all of those things, by the way, can be fixed outside of the criminal justice system with a better economic structure, with living wages, with education and mobility and access to getting out of your neighborhood, to getting into different jobs, with access to mental health and physical health, with access to substance abuse, which is often related to mental health and trauma. So we have programs that can help people. So if people have access to that, then you're going to have a massive amount of crime that has deteriorated. And they've done statistics on that. They've looked at neighborhoods with the exact same demographic of people. But when they were lower wage earning, they had less jobs and the jobs paid worse, there was more crime. And then the same people would move into a better situation and there was no crime, or it was significantly down. So it isn't about what's in people. It's how they're reacting with their heart and their mind to what's going on in the world. It actually costs less to fix our system, and it costs less to build alternative systems than it does to incarcerate people. Which leads me to racial justice, which is a larger set of laws that allow Black, Indigenous, and people of color the same chance when it comes to education, housing, healthcare access, voting, and jobs. That's it. It sounds so simple, but right now they're punished disproportionately with discrimination and profiling. So someone just trying to go from A to B, that's all they're trying to do. But B just keeps scooting away and they keep getting interrupted with X, Y, and Z on their way to B. And somebody else who's able to just get to A to B freely. Everyone should just be able to get to A to B freely, right? And to get help with the X, Y, and Z, or to not have those X, Y, and Z exist because they are a discriminatory and profiling moments in which don't need to happen. Finally, I'm going to talk about environmental justice, because we've talked about people and how people, because of the color of their skin, because of their race, because of the look of their body, the ability of their body, there are laws that aren't protecting them, and that there's discriminatory practices that make for a lot of suffering that's completely unnecessary. We also want to talk about animals and the environment. Environmental justice will include looking at the pollution of water, air, and land. Whenever there's oil spills, mountains of plastic swimming in the ocean, beaches covered with plastic. When we see things like this, we start to think there has to be a better way. Of course, there is a better way. And so sometimes it's again, laws. You can ask people to stop using plastic bottles, But ultimately, it's access to those plastic bottles, which is so easy. So passing laws where corporations have to change their behavior and what they do is a lot of what environmental justice people do. So too with the destruction of habitats through mining and deforestation, to say we have trees and the animals that live there and the whole ecosystem has a right to exist. And we should be protecting it instead of devaluing it, taking what we want to leave and leaving nothing but desolation. So there's a lot of people in environmental justice who are working for more sustainable, more environmentally friendly sources of energy and practices for toilet paper and clothing and all those things that we need. There's better practices. But companies will not shift and they will not change their behaviors often because it's cheaper to be less environmentally friendly. The cost is offset on the environment rather than on the corporation. So we do have to have laws that pass. And then finally, within environmental justice, I think, is animal justice, which is saying animals have a right, wild animals have a right to live freely, to have their habitat protected, to not be poached, to not be kidnapped and sold on the black market. The enslavement and abuse of animals is still rampant. Wild animals are a trade. They say there's more tigers in cages in Texas than there are in the wild. That is just incredibly sad. And it says something really sad about us as human beings, that we so devalue animals or see them as a thing that we can collect, like a book on my shelf, that's okay to do. So there's wonderful nonprofits that are doing advocacy work as well as trying to clean up the messes on the other side as well. And as Christians, I hope you would, with me, see the beauty and the value of a world in which all of us can thrive, where we respect each other's right to live, where we see all things and all people as having inherent dignity. That, to me, is shalom. And so working for shalom, we can't all do everything. But first, to be aware of the issues, to educate ourselves a little bit, and then when we can, to use our voices to speak up and to say, as a Christian, because I believe in peace and justice and the well-being of all that God has created, I think we need to change laws and we need to have better practices so that all can thrive. So there we go, my friends. I hope this was a good introduction. Obviously, more can be said on all of these things, but we are ending this year of peace in our hearts, focusing on how we can establish peace in this world. Shalom.